some of the themes in the book, there were a couple ideas associated with dispersal. There were about 6 different terms, everything from jump dispersals to sweepstake routes. It's just sort of all, some of the terms seem very similar and some seem very different. And what I want to do is try to help disentangle those ideas and give you some tools to think about how they're similar and how they're different. So, your book mentions corridors, filter bridges, and sweepstakes routes initially. And these are effectively a way of looking at animal movements focused not on the animals themselves, but focused more on barriers in the landscape, barriers out there in the environment. So, thinking of these 3 terms, think of corridors or filter bridges or sweepstakes routes as sort of like a level 1 barrier or a level 2 barrier or like a level 3 barrier. Each one gets successively harder. And we'll start with corridors. And corridors are habitat connections that allow for easy movement. If you have a forest animal and a corridor, any one of those animals in the forest can basically move through the corridor. It's effectively providing habitat for any animal to move through. In other words, it's a way of saying that the landscape is providing connectivity, complete connectivity for a particular species. I'm going to skip filter bridges for a second because I like sweepstakes routes. They're the extreme opposite example of a corridor. The sweepstakes route is basically a barrier that is so impossible to cross, it just doesn't happen. Except for these really, really rare, really weird, rare chance events. Give just a great example. There is a genus of plants found in Africa. The whole genus is found only in Africa, except for one particular species. That one particular species is found on the tops of giant mountains in Venezuela called tepuis. They're very tall, very flat, several thousand feet in the air, that are basically bare rock on the top with a thin layer of moss. And they're only found on one of thousands of tepuis in the area. Found on one tepui of thousands. Basically, in an area of just a few square kilometers. How did you get dispersal and then subsequent evolution of some plant from Africa all the way over to the top of a mountain in Venezuela? Okay. That's just weird. That just doesn't happen. That's like a 1 in a trillion type of chance event. Right? Now, for something that extreme to happen, and those things happen a little more than you'd expect, but still not very often, we call those sweepstakes routes. These extremely rare events that are sort of something that might happen every million years, every 5 million years, every 10 million years, everything's just aligned just right to allow for this crazy dispersal event across some barrier that the species have no business crossing. About 25 million years ago, closer to 30 million years ago, I forget the exact number, monkeys were only found on the continent of Africa. Actually, that's probably not entirely true. There were probably still some monkeys found up in Europe and Asia at that point. But there were no monkeys in North or South America. However, there's this very bizarre phenomenon of what's called rafting. And here we can sort of see an example of, I can't quite make this out, but this is a two-taught a sloth riding a vegetation raft that got swept out, presumably in a storm. It's still out on the branches, and wherever that branch ends up taking it is where it's going to go, right? It's very likely that some sort of rafting type event carried the first primates from Africa to South America about 30 million years ago via one of these rafting events. Now, as we'll see in a little bit, Africa and South America were a little closer together back then than they are now, but they're still really far apart. It was an extremely rare event that enabled that to happen, but that's another example of a sweepstakes route. So, in terms of thinking about a sweepstakes route, immediately think in your mind, that'll never happen, but sometimes apparently it does sometimes. Just reflect on that. That's so corridors, sweepstakes routes, exact opposites. Now somewhere in the middle is this idea known as a filter bridge. And the way to think about a filter bridge is this is basically a corridor that lets some species through, but not other species through. And you can sort of think of it, the way I like to think of it as a biologist is it's a semi-permeable membrane. It's letting some things through, but not everything through. So for example, if you look at species that inhabit North American grasslands and species that inhabit South American grasslands, there are things like large grazers like bison in Northern Hemisphere grasslands here in North America that would do just fine in South American grasslands. However, there is a pretty significant barrier to get from a North American grassland to a South American grassland. That is, they basically need to move through tropical forests in Central America, tropical forests in South America, and then back into grassland. Now, there are other species you might find in North American grasslands, such as deer. And deer, the white-tailed deer actually exists in North America, in grasslands. You'll find it in Central American tropical forests. You'll find white-tailed deer all the way down to Panama and all the way down into South American tropical forests. Given enough time, they haven't worked it out yet, but they could get there, down to those South American grasslands. The filter bridge is basically taking this barrier-based view. It's a type of semi-permeable membrane that allows some species through, but not all species through. You associate filter bridge, semi-permeable membrane for species, you've got the basic idea. So sort of three different ways of looking at the landscape as sort of the way in which it challenges species from But we don't have to look at dispersal in terms of the landscape. You can also look at dispersal from the perspective of the organism itself. So we can sort of change our perspective a little bit, look at it through the organism's view. And we'll look at, we have three new terms, jump dispersal, diffusion, and secular migration. Each term a little bit stranger than the last. Let's start with jump dispersal. Jump dispersal is not quite the same as another name for a sweepstakes route, although the concepts are a little bit linked. The idea is it refers to a single long-distance dispersal event that's improbable, undertaken by an individual organism or a small group of organisms that are then able to go on and establish a new population. I'll try.
That sounds like sweepstake route.
It sounds like sweepstake route, exactly. Okay. The main let me repeat this and then I'll come back to how it differs. Because it's a subtle difference. Right? So again, the jump dispersal event is a rare single long-distance dispersal event involving either individuals individual organism or a small group of organisms. And they are then able to establish a new population after that big jump dispersal. The difference between jump dispersal and sweepstakes routes, there's really two. The first of which is we're looking at it, again, from the perspective of the organism and not in terms of the landscape barrier. So it's an organism-centered view and not a landscape-centered view. But the second thing, which sort of makes it different, is that jump dispersal is not some sort of 1 in a trillion type of event. Jump dispersal is much more frequent. So something that might have a sweepstake event that's sort of a one-time in the history of life on Earth event would be different than a jump dispersal event where that sort of the same type of jump dispersal event might take place hundreds if not thousands of times. I like to think of sweepstakes routes as sort of singular, unique events that will never be repeated in history. Whereas jump dispersal is something that's going to happen with a very frequently, but still happen. We'll contrast jump dispersal with the idea of diffusion. Diffusion is, again, one of those words you've heard in 3 or 4 other classes by now. And of course, in ecology, it's the same general principle, but applied in a brand new way. So here we have some data on, what bird is this? I'll write it in my notes. I hope so, because I can't remember. Mystery bird. So there's a mystery bird I remember, ruby-throated hummingbirds. This is wintering locations of ruby-throated hummingbirds in the southeastern United States. So if you were to look at the location of where you found ruby-throated hummingbirds in December, because I believe these are from the Christmas bird count, you would find them largely just along the Gulf Coast, and then a little bit further inland along major river routes. However, if you look at that just 13 years later, you see that they're found a lot further north, up the Atlantic coast quite significantly, and then you've got the weird ball in Chicago and the weird oddball in St. Louis. But you sort of see this beginning to spread slowly further north. This is an example of what's called diffusion, in that each year, where you're finding the location of the population is sort of gradually beginning to shift. In this case, it looks like they're shifting their range probably on the order of about 25 miles a year, a little bit further north each year. Give us a really bizarre cold winter with one of those big Arctic troughs that drops down. And maybe, in 2019, we sort of trim the top off again. But as things continue to warm, that winter range is going to continue to slowly diffuse further north. This is a type of gradual movement across the landscape known as diffusion. The last concept is known as secular migration. And I think this is an awful name for it, but it's what we have. And your book gives an example involving camels. This is probably the mind-blowing fact of the day. We think of camels as being from the Middle East. If you're a little bit more cosmopolitan, you might also think of camels being as Asian. However, the camels originally evolved in North America. So they started in North America. And the idea of secular migration is you get these gradual movements of animals over geologic time, basically beginning to move these new areas. So the origin of camels, the oldest fossils actually come from Western North America. And we can basically trace the lineages of those ancestral camels down into South America, where now we have the alpaca, the racuna, the guanaco. Over in Asia, we've got camels that live in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, and then also into the Middle East and Africa, there are additional camels that have moved there as well. These movements take on the order of millions of years, and essentially as they go further and further apart, they undergo those generation to generation microevolutionary processes. They begin to build up barriers to gene flow and begin to evolve independently, ultimately leading to speciation events. So secular migration refers to these think of it as sort of movement over geologic time, gradually, not from one center of origin to other places.
Why don't we have camels anymore in the US?
Because some jerk 10,000 years ago killed them all with a spear. And that's not all. Oh, wait. Oh, I've got gold in this lecture coming up. Wait till you see what we have. I love extinct animals. We're going to talk about a few of them.
Just one guy killed them all.
There might have been two guys, but it was a couple guys. It was the same guys that killed the mammoths, the same guys that killed off the American lion, the same guys that killed off the giant lancelots.
We had a
Oh, going to get you started. I'm trying to stay focused.
Did preserve the avocado.
We got five.
All right. So now here 35 minutes later, I finished up Tuesday's lecture. And we compared and contrasted sort of different types of dispersal. Are there any questions before we start today's lecture? Where we'll see some cool extinct organisms. All right. Three main goals for today. I'd like to look briefly at this idea of vicariance and dispersal and how they can account for present-day species distributions. So sort of, they seem simple. They seem to be ideas that are relatively simple, but they're a little more complicated than they appear. We're going to look at some of the factors that could account for latitudinal gradients in species diversity that we looked at last time. And then if there's time, if we get to it, we'll look at some simple aspects of solar geometry and how that influences global energy capture and seasonal experience. So, let's start here. Exam 3 is coming up. This is exactly the kind of question I've asked in the past. And the past is a good predictor of the kinds of questions I will ask in the future. So, draw and label two curves indicating the relationship of the immigration rate to species number for a near island and a far island. Draw and label one curve indicating the relationship of extinction rate to species. So we'll put three curves on that line. Look. You're all thinking about the saggy X. The saggy X. You ever ask me about the saggy X, I'll know exactly what you're talking about.
No, it's just going to be one side of the saggy X.
Oh. You better find someone to collaborate with.
Well, just be minus 14. They'll have two different.
It's just label it. You don't draw a line.
On the line.
Ear Island.
You're 2/3 the way there. That's 2 points on 3. You don't need to read the graph. It's great on the y-axis.
So you would just draw these 2 lines, and then you would draw 1 line between small parts.
You too. You too.
X-axis is the
Going over 2 curves.
Do we have to do 3 by the end of the semester, or? And they're all on like Saturdays when I'm supposed to course. It's a Saturday when I'm supposed to work. Well, one is for the graduation, which I'm supposed to be attending. The other one's for the February orchestra, when I'm supposed to be working. So I can see if I can get that Saturday off. What are we doing? Just
There will be a, I promise you, you'll have a SATX on the upcoming
someone parked in the
exam.
wrong spot. Are we allowed to like hold?
And what we want to do first is, you're asked for 2 integration rates, an integration rate for near versus a far island. And you know that the immigration rates are going to be highest when there are no species present, because there's lots of available niche space that species can move into. So we know that immigration rate in general should look like this, starting off very high, plain. Number of species increases, and we know that the difference between near and far immigration on near and far islands is going to be just sort of a matter of grade. So we call this one near. Our far islands, same basic shape, but that immigration rate is going to be lower because that far island is more isolated. Everybody with me? So then what about the extinction rate? Because when we looked at this on the complicated SAGX graph, we had sort of the 2 extinction rates, the small island and the large island. How do we draw just one extinction line?
You knew what the question did, don't specify a size.
Don't specify a size. That is brilliant. So what we'll do is we'll draw on that extinction line. Starts at 0. I'm having trouble with the writing on the screen. I think you should probably make this incredible effort to get the finish. Thank you very much. And so, we were to take this one more step, where we expect a greater number of species on the island close to the mainland, or the island that's more isolated? Closer. How do you know?
The equilibrium point is higher.
The equilibrium point for species is higher for the near than for the far. All right. Got your picture? You want to share it? Your friends, but not your enemies? Excellent. Someday I'll be able to say.
The American lion is bigger than the African lion and all the other lions.
Have you got the diagram yet?
What?
All right.
7 years. 7 years.
I have a full 90-minute lecture on plate tectonics, which you're not going to get. I apologize. But just I'll give you the super short version. And that is where we are right now on this piece of continental crust. 500 million years ago, this crust existed, and it was found at 15 degrees south latitude. So it was found in the southern hemisphere. And it moved a few millimeters a year, each year, not directly to our current location, but generally north, a little bit sideways, a little bit backwards, and forward to our current position of about 40 degrees north latitude. So even though the continents are moving very slowly, over long periods of time, they can lead to some very, very large changes. So if you've heard the term continental drift, to sort of describe this idea of the Earth's plates are gradually moving through time, you can sort of smile and nod to yourself and say, this person sort of knows what this is, but they don't. Continental drift is an old idea that was proposed initially in the 1920s. That was later been replaced by the theory of plate tectonics. So scientists don't refer to it as continental drift, we call it plate tectonic theory, or plate tectonic action, referring to the movement of these plates across the landscape. Now, in Ohio, it's really unusual to have an earthquake. And there's a reason for that, and that's because we're in the middle of one of these giant continental plates. In places where plates come together, like along the west coast of the United States, up through Japan, down here through the whole Ring of Fire, these are places where you frequently have not just earthquakes, but you also have a lot of volcanic activity as well. So earthquake activity and volcanic activity tends to be concentrated in these places where plates come together. So earthquakes are not randomly distributed. They tend to be concentrated along these plate boundaries. And this phenomenon that we call earthquakes is actually the movement of those plates a few more millimeters at a time. So it's earthquakes that actually we sort of see as that movement of those plates.
Is the Ring of Fire where the Hawaiian Islands?
Hawaiian Islands is a little bit different because it is passing over a place